Remember when fast food felt stranger, more playful, and much less expensive? Before McDonald's dominated the roadside, America had restaurants shaped like barns, hot dogs steamed in beer, and chicken franchises that vanished almost overnight. Some became national giants before collapsing. Let's revisit 15 fast food chains that time forgotten. 1. Burger Chef. Burger Chef once ranked among the heavyweights of America's early fast food boom. At its height, the chain operated more than 1,200 restaurants and challenged McDonald's more directly than almost anyone else. Its influence is still visible today. Before the Happy Meal became a household name, Burger Chef introduced the Fun Meal, pairing children's food with toys and colorful packaging that turned dinner into an event. The company also gave customers unusual control over their order. At the Works Bar, diners could add their own toppings, an early version of the customizable burger format later associated with chains such as Five Guys. Burger Chef's flagship sandwich, the Big Chef, went head-to-head with the Big Mac and helped ignite one of fast food's earliest major burger rivalries. Innovation, however, could not protect the business from weak management. Problems grew through the middle of the 1970s, and the decisive setback arrived when General Foods bought the chain despite having little restaurant experience. In 1982, most remaining outlets were sold to Hardee's. The Burger Chef signs gradually disappeared, leaving behind old commercials, childhood memories, and ideas that larger competitors carried into the modern fast food industry. At a time when the market was still taking shape, Burger Chef repeatedly introduced features that competitors later refined. Its disappearance therefore concealed how much of the familiar family burger experience the company had helped establish. 2. White Tower. White Tower treated imitation as a complete business plan. Rather than borrowing a few ideas from White Castle, the chain copied nearly everything. Small square hamburgers, bright white buildings, castle-like details, and even employee uniforms. Its founders appeared to take White Castle's successful formula and change only one word in the name. For a time, the approach worked. White Tower reached more than 230 restaurants, concentrated mainly in the Midwest and on the East Coast. Early sliders sold for 5 cents, making them accessible even during the Great Depression. White exteriors and turreted roofs gave the outlets a highly visible identity from several blocks away. White Castle did not accept the resemblance as a compliment. In 1937, it sued White Tower for copyright infringement. The court required White Tower to alter its buildings and stop using copied marketing material. The resulting rebrand weakened the chain, and changing food preferences after World War II created additional pressure. White Tower's end was gradual rather than spectacular. It did not collapse in one dramatic bankruptcy. Restaurants simply closed one after another through the 1970s, as the brand lost relevance and scale. The last White Tower, located in Toledo, Ohio, remained open until 2004. Its closure ended a 78-year history, built on one of the boldest acts of imitation in the American burger business. 3. Royal Castle. White Castle controlled much of the northern market for miniature hamburgers, while Royal Castle built its own kingdom in the South. Founded in Miami during the Great Depression, the chain grew to 175 restaurants across Florida, Georgia, Ohio, and Louisiana. Its slogan, "Fit for a King," matched both the royal name and its ambitions. Royal Castle served small square burgers steamed over onions on soft buns. In the early years, each slider cost 15 cents, providing an affordable pleasure during difficult economic conditions. The chain paired them with birch beer, a carbonated drink similar to root beer, but distinctive enough to become a competitive advantage. Loyal customers could not shield the business from larger national chains entering its territory during the 1960s. Royal Castle was sold in 1969, and most locations closed under new ownership throughout the 1970s. One authentic restaurant remained in Miami, still serving sliders and birch beer to customers drawn by memory as much as hunger. It preserves the menu of a regional chain that once ruled its part of the slider market. 4. Red Barn. Finding a Red Barn restaurant rarely required directions. Customers simply watched for a building that looked like an actual bright red barn, complete with a sloping roof and cupola. That instantly recognizable design helped the chain expand to more than 400 locations across North America during the 1960s and 1970s, placing a piece of farm imagery in suburban and urban neighborhoods alike. The rural theme continued on the menu. Red Barn's signature Big Barney appeared before the Big Mac and combined 2 beef patties, special sauce, and toppings in a serious challenge to competing double-decker burgers. Larger appetites could order the Barn Buster, a sandwich built around the idea that one bun should hold as much food as possible. The television line, "When the Hungries hit the Red Barn," became familiar to a generation of customers. A memorable concept did not prevent damaging ownership decisions. Red Barn's parent company, Servomation, was acquired by Motel 6, which showed little interest in operating the restaurant business. Without steady leadership, outlets closed through the late 1970s, and by the middle of the 1980s, the chain had nearly vanished. Some of the buildings survived after the restaurants did not. Former Red Barns became independent eateries, offices, and other businesses, while their unmistakable shape continued to remind passing drivers of a once successful chain and the farm-themed burgers its customers still remember. The restaurants did more than sell food. They turned the building itself into an advertisement. The farm language carried from the exterior into the menu and promotions, giving Red Barn a personality many larger competitors lacked. Its decline also illustrated a recurring pattern in this history. A chain could attract loyal customers and still fail when ownership treated restaurants as a secondary concern. Once Motel 6 controlled the parent company, the concept received neither the attention nor the direction required to defend hundreds of locations. 5. Howard Johnson's. For decades, the orange roofs and turquoise spires of Howard Johnson's were familiar landmarks along American roads. Hojo's was more than a recognizable roadside restaurant. With more than 1,000 locations at its peak, it held the title of America's largest restaurant chain for years. The business began with a modest ice cream stand in Quincy, Massachusetts, then grew into a central part of family road trip culture. Speed was never its main promise. Howard Johnson's attracted travelers with range and consistency, especially its celebrated selection of 28 ice cream flavors. Long before later premium ice cream brands built reputations around unusual varieties, Hojo's was already offering travelers an extensive menu. Fried clams, tender sweet frankfurters, and other sit-down meals distinguished it from burger and fries competitors. Its decline followed a major shift in how Americans traveled and ate. The interstate highway system brought faster roadside chains, and families increasingly chose convenience over a longer dining stop. Howard Johnson's sit-down format began to feel dated. The final Hojo's restaurant, in Lake George, New York, closed in 2017. For many baby boomers, however, an orange booth at Howard Johnson's remains a vivid symbol of an American road trip that modern fast food has never fully reproduced. Even after the chain vanished, that combination of architecture, ice cream, and leisurely roadside dining remained deeply tied to its era. 6. Sambo's. Before IHOP and Denny's seemed to occupy every major intersection, Sambo's was one of America's dominant breakfast chains. It started with a single pancake house in Santa Barbara, California, then expanded at remarkable speed to 1,117 locations. The appeal was straightforward: inexpensive breakfast throughout the day, comfortable booths, and a setting designed for families. According to the chain, the name combined those of founders Sam Battistone and Newell Burnett. Many customers, however, connected it to the controversial children's story referenced in the restaurant's imagery. Although the founders described that association as accidental, the company decorated locations with scenes tied to the story. As the civil rights movement reshaped public attitudes during the 1970s, the name and branding became increasingly damaging. Management attempted alternatives, including Jolly Tiger and No Place Like Sam's, but rebranding could not reverse the decline. The company entered bankruptcy in 1981, and most restaurants closed or changed ownership. The name controversy was only one cause. Sambo's had expanded too aggressively and accumulated heavy debt. When high interest rates arrived in the late 1970s, The company could no longer manage its payments. One Sambo's remained in Santa Barbara, a reminder of a breakfast empire that, at one point, operated more restaurants than Burger King. Few chains rose and unraveled so visibly. 7. Lums. A hot dog steamed in beer sounds like a late-night experiment, yet that unusual preparation became the signature of Lums. The concept attracted enough attention to support more than 400 restaurants nationwide, with customers sometimes traveling considerable distances to taste the chain's beer-steamed hot dogs. Brothers Stewart and Clifford Perlman founded the business in Miami, Florida. What began as a small hot dog stand quickly developed into a full-service restaurant. The hot dogs drew the headlines, but the Ali burger built its own following through a distinctive seasoning created by the chef whose name it carried. Inside, dark wood, stained glass, and a comfortable pub-like atmosphere made Lums feel different from a typical quick-service burger counter. The chain's troubles began after the Perlman brothers sold it in 1971 for $4 million to the company that owned Caesar's Palace in Las Vegas. The new owners understood casinos better than restaurants. More ownership changes followed, and the system steadily weakened. Locations disappeared through the late 1970s and early 1980s. The last Lums, in Bellevue, Nebraska, continued serving the famous hot dogs until 2009. The original recipe has since slipped out of public view, although stories persist that former employees still prepare versions at home. The restaurants are gone, but the strange combination that made the chain famous has remained part of fast food memory. Its story also showed the risk of separating a distinctive restaurant concept from the founders who understood it. Each sale weakened the connection between the brand, its menu, and the atmosphere customers expected. 8. Henry's Hamburgers. McDonald's may define the fast food giant today, but Henry's Hamburgers once operated more locations than the Golden Arches. Created as a separate venture by the Breller's Ice Cream Company, Henry's expanded rapidly with a basic formula: sell appealing hamburgers for 10 cents, and keep the operation simple. In the early 1960s, Henry's had more than 200 restaurants, while McDonald's had about 150. Its menu avoided complexity. Customers chose hamburgers, cheeseburgers, fries, and Breller's ice cream, all served without elaborate sauces or complicated ordering. Many outlets used car hop service, with young employees carrying meals directly to parked customers. That service model eventually became a liability. While Henry's concentrated on the car hop experience, McDonald's moved toward the drive-through window. Diners increasingly preferred the greater speed and privacy of ordering without waiting for a server at the car. Henry's began losing ground by the late 1960s, and the oil crisis of the 1970s added another severe blow to a business tied closely to automobile culture. One Henry's Hamburgers remains in Benton Harbor, Michigan. It still serves burgers based on the original recipe to longtime fans and curious travelers. The surviving restaurant functions as a small time capsule of 1950s America and suggests that preserving a modest operation can sometimes outlast a much larger chain. Its history captures how quickly one service innovation can overturn a once successful operating model. 9. Dog and Suds. Few restaurant formats capture 1950s American car culture as clearly as Dog and Suds. The chain centered on two simple favorites: hot dogs and root beer, delivered to parked customers by car hops who sometimes wore roller skates. At its peak, more than 600 locations turned their parking lots into gathering places where teenagers could eat, talk, and show off their cars. Dog and Suds began in Champaign, Illinois, as a summer project created by two music teachers. Their homemade root beer became so popular that they left teaching and devoted themselves to expansion. A franchise system allowed local operators to introduce the concept throughout their communities, helping the chain spread quickly across the Midwest. The attraction involved more than the menu. A car hop clipped a metal tray to the vehicle's window, allowing customers to finish an entire meal without stepping outside. The Texas burger, Coney dog, and creamy signature root beer formed a compact selection that inspired repeat visits. The same car-based culture that supported Dog and Suds later changed around it. During the 1970s, Drive-through service replaced much of the traditional drive-in experience. After the founders sold the company, new management reduced the system rapidly. About 17 independently owned locations survived, still pouring root beer into frosted mugs. Their endurance shows how a distinctive experience can preserve loyalty long after the original national chain has contracted. The remaining restaurants preserve both the recipe and the ritual of eating beside the steering wheel. 10. Tops Drive-In. Tops Drive-In built its reputation on abundance. The Midwestern chain served oversized hamburgers and baskets of fries so full that customers could leave barely able to walk back to their cars. The restaurants emerged at the height of American drive-in culture, when having a meal delivered inside a parked vehicle felt modern and convenient. Tops specialized in big boy-style double-decker burgers covered with special sauce. They were messy, filling, and almost guaranteed to require several napkins. Car hops added spectacle, often moving between vehicles on roller skates while taking and delivering orders. That format lost its appeal during the early 1970s. Americans increasingly chose indoor dining rooms and drive-through windows, which offered advantages the traditional parking lot service could not match. As the classic drive-in began to feel outdated, Tops lost the culture that had supported it. By the late 1970s, virtually every Tops location had closed. The chain largely disappeared, along with the restaurant model it was designed to serve and celebrate. 11. Gino's Hamburgers. Gino's Hamburgers combined professional football with fast food long before celebrity-backed restaurants became common. Baltimore Colts defensive end Gino Marchetti founded the chain with several teammates, giving the young business immediate star appeal. Beginning in Baltimore, Gino's spread along the East Coast and eventually grew beyond 350 locations. The Gino Giant was its signature sandwich and a direct competitor to other large burgers of the era. Advertising declared that everybody went for a giant at Gino's, while the restaurants reinforced the sports connection with football memorabilia. Appearances by Colts players could turn an ordinary meal into a local event. Gino's also secured the region's first Kentucky Fried Chicken franchises. Many locations therefore operated as combination restaurants, selling both hamburgers and the Colonel's chicken. That two-part menu strengthened revenue and supported rapid expansion through the 1960s and early 1970s. The brand disappeared, not because customers suddenly rejected it, but because a buyer saw greater value in another identity. In 1982, Marriott Corporation purchased Gino's for $48 million and converted most of the restaurants into Roy Rogers locations. The football players who had become restaurant owners received their payoff, while the Gino's name left the roadside. Its rise showed how effectively sports fame could build a food brand decades before that strategy became routine. 12 Biff-Burger. Biff was an acronym for Best in Fast Food, and the chain tried to justify that confidence with a cooking method that set it apart. Long before flame broiling became closely associated with Burger King, Biff-Burger used a patented roto broiler to cook patties over an open flame. The process produced the charred flavor that former customers continued to remember decades later. Starting in Florida, Biff-Burger expanded through the eastern United States and reached roughly 200 restaurants during the 1960s. Red and white buildings with pagoda-style roofs made the locations easy to recognize from the highway. The menu stayed basic burgers, fries, and milkshakes, but the broiled taste gave customers a reason to return. The chain's greatest weakness was its inconsistent identity. Some restaurants used Biff-Burger, others called themselves Biffs, and still others operated under the Beef-Burger name. That fragmented branding confused the public and prevented a unified national advertising campaign. When larger competitors began spending heavily on television, Biff-Burger could not answer with one clear message. Most locations had closed or converted to other restaurants by the late 1970s. A single independently owned restaurant using the Biff name continued operating in St. Petersburg, Florida, without a connection to the original company. The brand largely disappeared, but its early use of flame broiling anticipated a technique that became standard across much of the industry. The company had a memorable product, but without one stable name, it could not turn that advantage into lasting national recognition. 13. Sandy's. A Scottish theme may seem unusual for an American hamburger chain, but Sandy's used tartan patterns, bagpipes in advertising, and a mascot dressed in Highland clothing to distinguish itself from ordinary burger stands. The company began when several dissatisfied McDonald's franchisees separated from that system and applied their fast food experience to a new brand. The Scottish identity was a deliberate competitive tool rather than a decorative afterthought. It helped Sandy's stand out, while the chain expanded to more than 200 Midwestern locations, with especially strong coverage in Illinois, Iowa, and Missouri. Thick hamburgers and Scottish treat desserts appealed to families seeking inexpensive food in a setting that felt different from the larger national chains. Sandy's did not disappear because the business had already failed. In 1972, it agreed to merge with Hardee's, another growing hamburger company with a similar menu. Combining the two systems offered greater scale and a stronger chance to compete against industry leaders. But the agreement required Sandy's to surrender its independent identity. By 1979, every remaining Sandy's had either closed or converted into a Hardee's. The brand faded quickly after the signs changed. Although some Midwestern customers continued to remember the red plaid sandwich wrappers and local radio jingles, Sandy's became a forgotten chain through consolidation, not through the kind of bankruptcy or operational collapse that ended many of its contemporaries. 14. Carrols. Carrols disappeared from restaurant signs, but its story is closer to a calculated transformation than a business failure. The company began with Carrols drive-in restaurants around Syracuse, New York. Its broad diner-style menu included hamburgers, hot dogs, seafood, and ice cream. A cartoon mascot with an enormous hamburger for a head appeared in advertising, smiling through the obvious inconvenience of having a sandwich as a face. The chain grew beyond 150 locations across the Northeast and Puerto Rico. Its club burger developed its own following, while orange and brown interiors, wood paneling, and molded plastic seating placed the restaurants firmly inside the visual style of the 1970s. Instead of waiting for a decline, management changed direction. In 1976, Carrols converted most of its outlets into Burger King franchises. The move removed the Carrols name from the public, but it turned Carrols Corporation from a regional restaurant brand into one of America's largest restaurant operators. The company behind the old chain continued to prosper and became the largest Burger King franchisee in the United States. For that reason, Carrols may represent fast food's most successful disappearance. The brand voluntarily traded its own identity for the strength of a larger system, while the organization, experience, and business judgment behind it remained active. Customers lost the Carrols sign, but the company itself did not vanish with it. The outcome separated the public brand from the underlying enterprise. One disappeared, while the other expanded through franchising under a name customers already knew. 15. Minnie Pearl's Fried Chicken. What could go wrong when a famous country comedian attached her name to a fried chicken chain? For Minnie Pearl's Fried Chicken, nearly everything did. More than 500 locations opened in only 2 years, a pace of expansion so extreme that it overwhelmed the business almost immediately. The restaurants used Minnie Pearl's familiar straw hat and dangling price tag, linking the chain directly to her stage image. The strategy seemed easy to understand. Imitate the success of other fried chicken companies, then add a popular country celebrity as the endorsement. Behind the signs, however, the operation lacked the systems required to support its growth. Many restaurants opened without adequate training or quality control. The recipe was not standardized, so customers could receive noticeably different chicken from one location to another. Franchise territories were sold without sufficient research, placing outlets in markets the company had not properly evaluated. The financial records became an even more serious problem, eventually leading to stock fraud charges. By 1970, most restaurants had already closed. The company entered bankruptcy in 1971, only a short time after its explosive launch. Business schools later examined the collapse as an example of how not to expand a restaurant chain. Few fast food brands have risen so quickly, opened so widely, and then fallen apart with such speed. These 15 vanished chains form a revealing chapter of American dining history. Their signs may be gone, but their menu ideas, service models, branding experiments, mergers, and failures still influence the fast food industry we recognize today.